Welcome back, Black Knight Scholars. Today, we're going to be talking about the Catholic Counter-Reformation. And for you, that means you need to get out your VidNotes packet that says Unit 2, Renaissance and Reform. And please turn to page 10 and 11 of this packet. We're going to be exploring how the Catholic Church strikes back against those Protestants who want it to change. So the main question we're going to be dealing with today is, how did the Catholic Church of the 1500s respond to the Protestant Reformation? And we're going to be using the acronym SINS. We're going to be using this acronym to answer this question. One way the Catholic Church responded was this picture. The Catholic Church tortured those Protestants who would not express their guilt and say that they were doing wrong. Let's review. We have some Protestant reformers. We talked about Martin Luther and his 95 Theses, criticizing the Catholic Church in a very public way, and his supporting cast: John Calvin, who started a theocracy in Switzerland; King Henry VIII, who went against the Pope and divorced his first wife. He also broke away from the Catholic Church. Queen Elizabeth I, who tolerated both Protestants and Catholics within the Anglican Church of England. Jan Hus and John Wycliffe, who supported translating the Bible into their country's languages. And Johann Gutenberg, whose printing press printed the Bible in many different languages and increased literacy throughout Europe so that people could think for themselves about these religious matters. We also talked about how Christianity during this time splits. The Catholic Church have held a lot of the power, but during this time in the 1500s and the 1600s, the Protestant Church comes to being. Lutherans follow the beliefs of Martin Luther in northern Germany, and Calvinists practice Calvinism, the idea of predestination. They are strict in their belief, and many different forms of Calvinism take shape. All right, at first, church leaders ignore the Reformation. They think it's a phase that will go away, but it doesn't. We'll talk about that later. But first, the early stages of the Reformation in the 1500s see popes arrest and excommunicate heretics. Excommunicate means to kick out. So the popes kick out the outlaws who are Protestants. And these church leaders refuse to listen to the messages of Martin Luther and John Calvin and others who want the church to change. Pope Leo X is such a pope. He says this about Martin Luther and his followers: "Let Martin himself and all those adhering to him and all those who shelter and support him know that from our heart we beseech you to cease to disturb the peace, unity, and truth of the church." So Pope Leo X feels Martin Luther and others are just bothersome characters that will eventually fade away. That doesn't happen. One way the Catholic Church tries to stop Protestantism is using war. And one such war is actually a series of wars called the 30 Years' War in Germany. From 1618 to 1648, the Protestant princes in northern Germany, who practiced the teachings of Martin Luther, go up against the Catholics in southern Germany. Who are these Catholics? Well, they are ruled by a family called the Habsburgs, and they rule the entire Holy Roman Empire at this time. This is Holy Roman Emperor Ferdinand, and Ferdinand closes all the Protestant churches in southern Germany. And the North German princes don't like this. War ensues. What's the end result? It's the Peace of Westphalia in 1648. All areas of Germany could now practice whatever form of Christianity they wanted. But that peace was the result of many, many years of hard fighting. 1/3 of the German population died during the 30 Years' War. This list shows you how devastating the 30 Years' War was. 3 million people died during this conflict. Not quite as much as the 70 million in World War II, but the 30 Years' War nevertheless makes the list of the deadliest conflicts in the history of the planet. Another character enters the 30 Years' War that we need to mention. His name is French Cardinal Richelieu. Cardinal means that he is a leader of the Catholic Church, and he is an example of a religious leader who has become a politician. Religion and politics, should they mix? He says yes. Cardinal Richelieu is Catholic, but convinces France's leaders to support the Protestants in this North German versus Catholic war. Why? Why do such a thing? France feels threatened by the Holy Roman Empire, so they want the North German princes on their side. Another religious war during the Reformation was the French Wars of Religion from 1562 to 1598. Who fought? The Catholics and the Huguenots, those in France who supported John Calvin. Why did they fight? Well, the Huguenots wanted equal rights. And there's the leader of France at the time, Henri IV. So the French Wars of Religion, how did it all start? The Massacre of Vassy. This is a picture of that massacre. You see people are fleeing. They are climbing walls. In 1562, in a town called Vassy, France, a group of Huguenots were worshiping their Calvinist beliefs in a barn. A local Catholic duke walks by and sees this meeting. He then locks the barn doors and sets the barn on fire, which kills 30 Huguenots and injures hundreds of others who are worshiping. This event sparks the French Wars of Religion, and wars and battles ensue for more than 30 years. After all of this fighting, what happens? Well, there is a peace. It's called the Edict of Nantes, and it's the first major religious freedom law, saying that the Huguenots can practice their religion in France without persecution. The Inquisition was another way the Catholic Church tries to strike back against the Protestants. The Inquisition was when the Catholic Church establishes a court system in each town in Europe to arrest, put on trial, and punish Protestant heretics, those outlaws. So, you're a heretic, you're arrested, you have options. What's one option? You can admit your guilt to the Catholic Church and give names of other heretics who are criticizing the church, and you would be released or face a light torture or prison sentence. You wouldn't be put to death. And here is a man being tortured by members of the Catholic Church because of his heretical ways. If you were a Protestant heretic, you had a second option. Your second option was to refuse to admit your guilt to the Catholic Church, stay true to your beliefs, and face a public execution. This sketch shows you a heretic who is on stage in front of a town about to be executed. So the Inquisition was a violent time for the Catholic Church, but they felt if they showed this violence, it would strike fear in the heart of people and they would not criticize the church. The N in sins, no more false selling of indulgences and other abuses of power. This was said by Catholic leaders at meetings called the Council of Trent from 1545 to 1563. Here to the left, you see a painting of one of the meetings of the Council of Trent. The Catholic leaders eventually admit to themselves, we have to reform. We are corrupt. These indulgences, these tickets to heaven are not right. And there's one pope who calls these meetings to order. It's Pope Paul III. And the Council of Trent was a way the Catholic Church reaffirms or reestablishes church doctrine, doctrine being a set of beliefs. What types of things were talked about in these meetings? What were the agreed upon reforms? First, priests were required to attend seminary. They had to be educated to be leaders. Bishops must regularly visit their diocese. Diocese is an area of land that the Catholic Church would oversee. Believe it or not, some bishops before this meeting did not visit the place they were supposed to oversee, showing their corruptness. The Council of Trent also said that the church must interpret the Bible, not the individual. The Council of Trent also set up the Society of Jesus. This was a Catholic missionary group that we'll talk about a little bit later, but it was important to spread the Catholic faith around the world. Lastly, the Council of Trent established the Index of Prohibited Books, first in 1559. They listed books and works by Protestants that had to be burned. They also said all Bibles must be in Latin. Society of Jesus, I just mentioned that. They were also called the Jesuits, and they were basically a spiritual army. They were founded by this man, Ignatius of Loyola, Spain. And the goals of the Jesuits. First, they wanted to build Catholic schools. Education was important to Jesuits. In fact, today in the U.S., Jesuits run 45 high schools and 28 colleges, including Georgetown University in Washington, D.C., near us. The second goal of Jesuits was to convert non-Christians to Catholicism by traveling around the world on mission trips. And the third goal of Jesuits was to stop the spread of Protestantism. How did Reform and the Reformation change cultural values and traditions? Well, at first, the Reformation was divisive. It divided the countries of Europe on religious principles, leading to religious intolerance. This is a period when there are a lot of conflict and many wars. Eventually, after the conflicts, after the dust settled, there was growth in Europe. Individualism set in. People were starting to form their own ideas about religion. And the focus was more on the individual belief. Secularism. People started to realize they could educate themselves not just on church matters, but on different kinds of matters. Science, history. Also tolerance. The Catholic Church grew to understand they needed to live with the ideas of Luther and Calvin, and if not fully embrace them, at least accept them and tolerate them. That took a long time for the church to come to grips with. So the dust has settled. Let's look at a map of Europe after the Reformation. You see the different denominations of Christianity all across the continent. You see Lutherans in Northern Europe. You see Calvinists here in purple pockets in Europe. You see the Catholic Church still has a strong presence in Europe. And the Anglican Church, of course, that's going to be in England. And these dots show the Huguenots, the French Calvinists, and where they have settled. We're almost done. At this time, on page 11, please answer your summary questions. I wanted to show you a brief preview of next unit. Lesson 5 marks the end of Unit 2. Unit 3 explores the age of exploration. Until next time, this is Mr. Deegan, signing off.